The rusty wrench and broken dreams, Jake. Morrison wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. His small repair shop on the outer rim station of Nexus 7 barely kept the lights on, but it was honest work. The smell of burnt circuits and recycled air filled the cramped space where he fixed everything from coffee makers to life support systems. The morning started like any other until the transport ship docked. Jake watched through his grimy window as security forces dragged out prisoners in energy shackles. Most were hardened criminals, but one caught his attention. A young woman, barely 20, with silver-blue skin and eyes that held more intelligence than fear. She wasn't human, but she wasn't like the other aliens either. Her species was unknown to Jake, but her condition was clear. Malnourished, beaten, wearing nothing but prison rags. The guards threw her into a holding cell, visible from his shop window. Something about her reminded him of a caged bird that refused to stop singing. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those eyes. He'd seen plenty of prisoners come through Nexus 7, but this one was different. She wasn't broken like the others. When morning came, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Jake had connections on the station. Being the guy who fixed everyone's broken junk meant people owed him favors. He called in every single one. A guard who needed his daughter's medical scanner repaired. A dock worker whose artificial leg Jake had maintained for free. A cafeteria owner whose food processors Jake kept running despite being held together with hope and spare parts. The plan was simple and completely insane. During the prisoner transfer to the maximum security transport, there would be a 12-second window when the energy barriers were down for system reset. Jake would create a distraction, and his friend Rico would disable the lock on her cell dock. Everything went wrong immediately. The distraction worked too well, causing a station-wide power outage. Security swarmed everywhere. But in the chaos, Jake found himself face to face with the alien woman in the darkened corridors. She looked at him with those remarkable eyes and spoke in perfect standard. Her voice was like music mixed with starlight. She told him her name was Zephyra, and she was not a criminal. She was a scientist, captured by pirates who sold her to slavers, who sold her to worse people. Her research had been stolen. Her people thought she was dead, and she had nothing left except her mind. Jake made another insane decision. Instead of just helping her escape, he offered her sanctuary. His repair shop had a hidden room where he sometimes stored valuable salvage. She could hide there while they figured out how to get her off the station safely. For 3 months, Zephyra lived in that tiny hidden room. Jake brought her food, books, and salvaged computer parts. She was brilliant beyond anything he'd ever seen. She could fix quantum processors with primitive tools and solve engineering problems that stumped the station's best technicians. But more than that, she never forgot his kindness. Every day, she thanked him for treating her like a person when the entire galaxy had treated her like property. Jake had given her something more valuable than freedom. He had given her back her dignity and hope for the future, the escape and the promise. The knock on Jake's repair shop door came at 3 a.m., sharp and urgent. He grabbed his plasma wrench, expecting trouble, but found Captain Torres of the Merchant. Vessel Star Dancer. Torres owed Jake big time after he'd jerry-rigged the ship's failing hyperdrive with spare microwave parts and determination. Zephyra emerged from her hiding spot, and Jake's heart sank at her expression. She'd been monitoring the station's communication networks with equipment he'd helped her build. The hegemony forces were coming. Someone had identified her as a high-value target, and they were bringing serious firepower to Nexus-7. Torres looked between them and sighed. He was a good man running contraband medicine to outer colonies, not a hero. But Jake had saved his ship and crew more times than he could count. The captain agreed to smuggle Zephyra off station, but the timing had to be perfect. The plan required Jake to stay behind. Someone needed to maintain the fiction that Zephyra had never been on Nexus 7. If he disappeared too, it would confirm their suspicions. Zephyra protested, saying she wouldn't leave him to face the consequences alone, but Jake was firm. She had a chance at a real life out there. He had his repair shop, and his stubborn pride dot as they prepared for her departure. Zephyra pulled Jake aside. She pressed a small device into his hands, something she'd built from salvaged parts during her months in hiding. It looked like an ordinary power cell, but she explained it was much more. Inside was compressed data containing her life's work, her research, and something else that would make sense later. She made him promise to keep it safe, no matter what happened. If she ever made it back to civilization and managed to rebuild her life, she would return for it and for him. Jake thought she was being overly optimistic, but he promised anyway. How could he refuse someone who'd already lost everything? The escape went smoother than expected. Torres's ship launched during a shift change, just another trader heading for the outer systems. Jake watched from his shop window as the Star Dancer's lights disappeared into hyperspace, carrying away the most remarkable person he'd ever met. The hegemony forces arrived 6 hours later, 3 warships and a full investigation team. They turned Nexus 7 upside down looking for Zephyra, interrogating everyone who might have seen her. Jake endured 12 hours of questioning, maintaining his story that he'd never seen escaped prisoners. His reputation as a simple mechanic who minded his own business helped sell the lie. After the hegemony forces left, life on Nexus 7 returned to its normal rhythm of barely controlled chaos. Jake went back to fixing broken appliances and dreaming of better days, but something had changed. The hidden room felt empty, and he found himself talking to the silence where Zephyra's voice used to be. Months passed, then years. Jake kept the device she'd given him in a secure compartment, checking on it regularly. Sometimes he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing. But then he'd remember her laugh when he'd shown her how to make coffee with a broken food processor, or the way she'd brightened whenever he brought her a new technical manual. The device never activated, never sent any signals. Jake began to think Zephyra hadn't made it after all. Space was dangerous for refugees, especially ones being hunted by the hegemony. But he kept his promise anyway, because promises to friends should be kept even when those friends might be dead. Jake Morrison remained on Nexus 7, fixing broken things and keeping broken promises, while somewhere in the vast galaxy, Zephyra was building something extraordinary. The return of a legend 23 years later. Jake's hair had gone completely gray, and his back complained every morning about decades of crawling under machinery. His repair shop had expanded slightly, now employing 2 apprentices who handled the simple jobs while Jake tackled the impossible ones. His reputation had grown too. People brought him problems that stumped entire engineering teams. The morning everything changed started with his coffee maker exploding. Not metaphorically, actually exploding in a shower of sparks and synthetic caffeine. Jake was still cleaning up the mess when his communication terminal chimed with an incoming priority message. The hologram that appeared made Jake drop his wrench. Zephyra stood there, but not the frightened refugee he remembered. This woman wore robes that probably cost more than his entire shop, and her silver-blue skin seemed to glow with inner light. Behind her, through the hologram's background, Jake glimpsed impossible architecture and floating platforms. She smiled the same smile. He remembered, but now it carried the confidence of someone who had conquered galaxies. She told him she was sorry it had taken so long to return, but she'd kept her promise. Her words hit Jake like a meteor strike. She was now the head of the largest technology corporation in the known universe, with research facilities on 100 worlds and trade agreements with species most people had never heard of. The scared refugee had become Zephora Vex, the Galactic Billionaire, whose innovations had revolutionized everything from faster-than-light travel to agricultural systems. Jake had been reading about her company's breakthroughs for years, without connecting them to the woman who'd hidden in his shop, but she hadn't forgotten him or his kindness. The device he'd protected all these years contained not just her research, but detailed plans for technologies that would transform human civilization. She'd kept humanity in mind while building her empire, designing solutions specifically for their problems and limitations. More importantly, she wanted Jake's help with something bigger than business. Her success had made her powerful enemies, including the hegemony forces that had once hunted her. They were planning something that would threaten every independent world in the galaxy, and she needed someone she could trust absolutely. Jake looked around his small repair shop, then back at the hologram of his friend, who had become a legend. He asked the obvious question about why she needed a broken-down mechanic when she commanded resources beyond imagination. Her answer was simple and devastating. Because out of everyone in the galaxy, he was the only one who had helped her when she had nothing to offer in return. That kind of character couldn't be bought or manufactured. It had to be earned through a lifetime of small choices. And Jake, Morrison had been making the right choices since before he knew they mattered. She needed someone who would do the right thing, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The hologram flickered as Zephora leaned forward, her expression serious. She told him that a ship would arrive within the week to collect him. And the device. They had work to do, and the fate of the galaxy might depend on a friendship forged in a hidden room above, a repair shop on a forgotten space station. After the transmission ended, Jake sat in silence, processing what had just happened. His quiet life was about to become very complicated, but he found himself smiling for the first time in years. The conspiracy unveiled the ship that arrived for Jake wasn't what he expected. Instead of the luxury yacht he'd imagined, Zephora sent a disguised freighter called the Honest Trader. Its captain, a gruff woman named Nova Kane, looked like she could arm wrestle an asteroid and win. She greeted Jake with suspicious eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. The journey to Zephyra's headquarters took 8 days through hyperspace, giving Jake time to absorb the magnitude of what his friend had built. Nova showed him data, files that made his head spin. Zephora Industries had research stations in 17 different solar systems, employed over 2 million sentient beings, and had trade agreements with governments that spanned 3 galactic arms. But Nova also revealed the darker truth. The hegemony hadn't given up their hunt for Zephora. They'd been systematically infiltrating her organization, sabotaging her research, and eliminating anyone who got too close to their plans. 3 of her top scientists had died in suspicious accidents in the past year alone. Jake arrived at Axiom Prime, Zephyra's headquarters world, to find a planet that defied physics and imagination. Floating cities connected by streams of pure energy, forests of crystalline trees that hummed with harmonic frequencies, and research laboratories that looked like they'd been designed by dreaming gods. It was beautiful and impossible, exactly what he'd expect from someone whose mind worked like Zephyrus. Their reunion was emotional, but brief. Zephora looked older, carrying the weight of responsibility from millions of employees and billions of customers. But when she hugged Jake, he saw the frightened young woman he'd once hidden in his shop. She'd grown powerful, but never forgotten who she really was. She led him to a secure conference room where the real crisis became clear. The hegemony had developed something called Project Silence, a weapon system designed to shut down all non-human technologies simultaneously. Every alien species in the galaxy used quantum-based systems that shared certain fundamental frequencies. The weapon would target those frequencies, leaving only human technology functional. The plan was genocide through technological collapse. Entire civilizations would lose their life support, their ships, their communication networks, all at once. Billions would die, and humanity would emerge as the only spacefaring species left. The hegemony leaders believed this would ensure human dominance for millennia. Jake stared at the technical specifications, his repair shop experience helping him understand the horrible elegance of the design. It was brilliant, evil, and unfortunately possible. The quantum frequency resonance theory was sound, and the power requirements, while massive, were achievable with current human technology. But Zephyr had a plan. The device Jake had protected contained more than just research data. It held the key to a counter-frequency that could neutralize Project Silence before it launched. However, implementing the counter-frequency required access to the hegemony's primary communication network, and that meant infiltrating their most secure facility. The facility was located on Ragnarok Station, a military installation in the dead zone between galactic arms. It was surrounded by automated defense platforms, patrolled by the hegemony's best ships, and staffed by fanatics who would rather die than surrender. Getting inside would require a miracle or something very close to it. Jake listened to the briefing and realized why Zephyr really needed him. Not for his technical skills, though those would help. She needed him because the mission required someone willing to sacrifice everything for the right cause. Someone who had already proven they would do the right thing when it mattered most. Plan was insane, dangerous, and had approximately a 12% chance of success, according to their best analysts. But it was the only chance they had to prevent the systematic murder of entire species. Jake looked at his friend, the brilliant woman who had risen from nothing to save the galaxy, and gave her the only answer he could. He was in. The last stand and new beginnings. The assault on Ragnarok Station began at 0400 Galactic Standard Time, with Jake Morrison cramped inside a maintenance pod, wearing a spacesuit held together with prayer and duct tape. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its complexity. While Zephyr's fleet created a massive distraction on the far side of the station, Jake would infiltrate through the waste disposal system. It was exactly the kind of job that required someone comfortable with broken machinery and impossible situations. Jake had spent his entire life fixing things that shouldn't work, and now he was about to become the most important repairman in galactic history. The waste disposal shaft was a nightmare of spinning blades, energy barriers, and automated systems designed to destroy anything larger than a coffee cup. Jake navigated through it like he was threading a needle in a hurricane, using tricks he'd learned maintaining garbage processors on Nexus 7. Every skill he'd ever developed in his cramped repair shop suddenly became essential for saving civilization. He reached the station's central computer core just as Zephyr's fleet engaged the hegemony forces outside. The battle was vicious, with both sides knowing that defeat meant extinction. Jake could feel the station shaking as weapons fire pounded against its shields, but he forced himself to focus on the delicate work ahead. The counter-frequency device had to be perfectly integrated with the station's communication array, and there was no room for error. One mistake would trigger security protocols that would lock down the entire facility. Jake's hands, steady from decades of precise repair work, moved through the installation process while explosions rocked the station around him. The hegemony's Project Silence weapon was already charging, preparing to broadcast its deadly signal across the galaxy. Jake could see the countdown on nearby monitors, showing less than 10 minutes before activation. He worked faster than he'd ever worked before, adapting Zephyr's technology to systems that had never been designed to work. Together, with 3 minutes remaining, Jake activated the counter-frequency. The device hummed to life, sending its protective signal through the same network that would carry Project Silence. Every non-human civilization in the galaxy would receive the counter-frequency first, immunizing their technology against the hegemony's weapon. but the activation triggered every security system on Ragnarok Station. Blast doors slammed shut, emergency lockdown protocols engaged, and Jake found himself trapped in the computer core with very angry hegemony soldiers cutting through the barriers. He'd completed his mission, but survival was looking increasingly unlikely. That's when Zephyra arrived, leading a boarding party through sections of the station that Jake's infiltration had left vulnerable. She fought like someone defending her family, because in a very real sense, she was. The galaxy was full of people who had shown her kindness, and she refused to let them die because of human paranoia and hatred. The rescue was brutal and desperate, with both sides knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. Jake and Zephyra fought their way to the hangar bay while Project Silence fired harmlessly into space, its deadly signal neutralized by the counter-frequency they'd installed together. They escaped Ragnarok Station just as its reactor overloaded, taking the facility and the hegemony's dreams of genocide with it. The explosion was visible from 3 solar systems away, a brilliant funeral pyre for hatred, and the birth announcement of a new age of cooperation. In the aftermath, Jake found himself appointed as Zephyra's Director of Impossible Solutions, a job that basically meant fixing problems that shouldn't exist and shouldn't be solvable. It was perfect for a man who had spent his life making broken things work again. But more than that, he had helped save the galaxy by being exactly who he'd always been. A decent person who helped others when they needed it most. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never meant to be heroes at all. They just kept doing the right thing until it changed the universe. Jake Morrison had freed her when she was nothing, and when she became everything, she remembered who had believed in her first.